Hi, it's Lynton here, and this is Sketch and Tell. I would like to take you through a little art lesson, kind of like a journey, and explain the steps and the thoughts that go through my mind as I'm doing it. If you want to pause here and get some materials, that'd be great. But if you want to watch and maybe just then apply some of these pointers to your own artwork, that's okay as well. I'm going to be doing a scene that's in my mind, it's in my imagination. It's an outdoor scene, it's what we call a seascape or a beach scene, and it's very traditional. But I'll explain at the end why I'm doing this. As with any outdoor scene, I like to begin with just a couple of lines to mark out or map out the main areas. And the one I begin with is the horizon line, which we'll put it about a third of the way down. It's always good to do paintings in thirds. Either you would do that line a third of the way down or a third of the way up from the bottom. The other lines, I'll do the second line, which is going to mark out where the ocean kisses the land, where it kind of meets the sand. But I want this painting to have a real depth to it. I want it to have some sand dunes and a pathway leading down to the beach. And so I'll mark out the path with a couple of sand dunes, or one on that side and one on this side here. So we'll have the sky, the water, the sand and the sand dunes either side. And then it comes down to just playing around with colours. This is really, it's kind of an intuitive process. You don't have to be thinking of doing exactly like a photo. It's all about putting something of yourself into your painting, your choice of colours. And just experiment and have fun. Don't be too hard on yourself. As with most paintings with an outdoor setting, it's always good to start from the top down. So let's begin with some colours which I'm just going to randomly put on here. And I'm going to go for some pinks and purples and light blues for a kind of an early morning view or scene. And as I do this, I'm going to share something that I often do, and that is art for me is not just a technical process. For me, sometimes it's a meditative process where I'm thinking about, I guess, deeper issues, and the art just kind of helps me slow down and go to that sort of deeper place. But it's also a time for me to, if I'm wrestling with a problem, to just kind of let that problem kind of mull around in my mind and in my heart. And I'm going to share a particular problem that I had, again, quite a few years ago when I was considering stepping out onto the road and taking art and storytelling around Australia as a way to connect with people from all walks of life. And again, I'm just back to the colours, just trying out some colours, but I will add a few more and just sort of blend them together and see what comes out. Now the problem was this, and that is that as I was thinking about, well, how am I going to pay the bills and kind of source this operation, I thought, well, at some point I'm going to have to put a price on my art. If somebody would like to buy it, what am I going to say? And that's a real difficulty for any person who's into the creative arts, is how do you value your work? Let's just move down to the water. I'm going to again just use different blues and greens. We'll just create that horizon line there and work our way down. And again, just playing around with different colours. We'll go for a greeny blue, a nice kind of colour there. I like that one. And as I'm doing this, I want to kind of just share the problem. Kind of what went through my head as I was thinking this out. I was thinking, well, is it simply just a matter of adding up the sum of the cost of materials and the amount of time, put a price on, per hour or whatever it is? Is that how you value your artwork? But then I thought, well, it's not as easy as that. I mean, you could do that, but if it comes down particularly to time, I kind of go to the other end of the spectrum. Instead of working alone in my studio and taking hours to do a painting, and sometimes I do that, but mostly I'm doing my art in front of people. And I have to work very fast. and instead of taking hours, my art will take perhaps only minutes. Now the question is, what's worth more? The one painting that takes only a few minutes that I do quickly in front of an audience, or the one that I slow right down and spend more time on at home? So I was wrestling with that, and then I thought, well, maybe another way of working this out is to compare my art with someone else. Have a look at what prices they put on their paintings, and then sort of work out where do I sort of stand. Now, this gave me an opportunity to go down to Sydney, and before I explain the next bit, I'm going to just start putting in some waves just coming in onto the beach, and again I'll just add a little bit of darker purple here to create the set of waves rolling in onto the beach. I went to Sydney because I found that there was an exhibition being held down there of one of my favourite artists, whose artwork is, I just love it. Now, his works are a little bit bigger than mine and he uses a different medium, but nonetheless it's kind of a similar style. And also as an excuse just to also take a weekend off and head off down to Sydney. I was living in the Gold Coast at the time. And as I was walking around the gallery looking at his paintings, I'm just going to put a little bit of white on top of the waves just to create that sense of movement as the wave is moving in towards the beach. As I was looking at his paintings, now immediately if you go to a gallery like that and there's no prices on the paintings and they give you a catalogue instead, you know you're in a different sort of space. But nonetheless, as I was sort of looking at the prices, comparing it to the painting, I was seeing it was they ranged, you know, anywhere between $25 to $60, some up to $120,000 each. And I was thinking to myself, man, lucky dog, you only have to do a couple of those a year and you're right. But I also knew, and I knew this before I went, but I also knew that to compare yourself with someone else is a fruitless exercise, because we're all different. We do different sorts of art. We do it to different audiences. And I knew that this particular artist works he works in a very different space than me. He's going for the top end of the art market. He's aiming his art to attract the wealthy buyers. And that's why he puts the big prices on. He's also won some pretty high rate awards, and that kind of raises your price level as well. For me, I knew I was going to the other end of the spectrum. That's a choice. There's no judgment value here. It was a choice that I was making, that I wanted to go to people who were from all walks of life. I wanted to go into schools, I wanted to go into community groups, I wanted to go out into the markets, and I wanted to go into the prisons. Now, that's a very different sort of person that I am pitching my art to. We'll start on the beach now. I'm going to just quickly put down some nice beach colours. And I kind of know that with art, it's very subjective. You can kind of put any price. You're like, I don't know, I could put $120,000 on this painting. But it's kind of like that very famous quote in the classic Australian movie, The Castle. When the father asks the son, well, how much is that guy asking for? And, on the trading post for that item, the son tells him, and his father replies, tell him he's dreaming. And I knew that if I started putting really big prices on mine, that's probably mostly the response that people would have. But it didn't answer the question, what value could I put on my paintings? And this is where I met a person who became a friend. He's another artist, he lives up at Noosa, and again, I just love his artwork, very different than mine. But we were talking about this dilemma, and he just shared with me some of his wisdom, and I found it very helpful. He told me, Lynton, you need to understand that the art world is a weird, it's a strange world to work in. There are no givens, there are no standards, and you can be up one year and down the next. And he said, but when it comes to pricing, he says, what he would encourage me to do is to go away to a quiet place, to perhaps take a glass of wine and just start to think about what I value my art at. He said, go to your heart, and in your heart, what do you value? He said, now of course, take into account your materials, take into account who it is that you're trying to pitch your art to. But he said, in the end, only you alone can put a value on your painting. And he says, let me give you some advice there. He says, don't undervalue yourself so that if you do sell your art, that you really resent the fact that you've kind of given it away and the person's ripping you off. But he says, equally, don't overprice yourself, because he said, even if you do sell a painting, you've got to live with your conscience. You've got to live with yourself. And if you know deep down that it's not worth what that person has, you've asked them to pay, then that's a tension inside. It's not worth having. He said, somewhere in the middle, you've got to find that sweet spot. And that's what I did. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I came up with, but I am going to just say that there was kind of like a sliding rule to the value that I put on art that I do quickly in front of people, to the art that I might do as a commission or that I take a lot more time at home. But as I was thinking through this dilemma, it kind of led on to another question that I constantly wrestle with. And that is, if it's hard to put a value on art, what about ourselves? Now, before I explain, let me just start putting some grass onto these sand dunes. And again, just using some different greens, using the pastel in a way to create that kind of texture to make it look like sand grass. And then I'm going to be adding some trees in the foreground to give that sense of deep perspective. But as I'm putting the grass on, let's come back to how do we value ourselves? And I'm talking about deep down inside, what do we think about our own sense of worth? How do we measure that? Now, the world that we live in sort of says it's pretty basic, really. It's by the way we measure our worth is by looking at external things, surface things, and comparing ourselves with others. And those surface things kind of, I put them in three sort of categories. And the first one would be, of course, your material wealth. There is this culture that we live in. We live in a consumer culture, and we live and breathe it, whether we realise it or not. It's everything we see. It's what it's how we measure people, to how much they have kind of equals to perhaps what they're worth. If they're driving the best and latest car, and if they're wearing the fashion items, brands of clothes, if they're, well, let's put it this way. I can still remember pulling up at the stoplights one time on the Gold Coast, and I was just in an old station wagon, looked over to the car beside me that pulled up, and it was a gold Mercedes convertible, and the guy sitting in it had all sorts of bling all over him, and I just looked at his car and looked at him and thought about myself and thought, wow, he's obviously a lot better than me. He's a lot well off than me. And it was very easy then to start putting myself down and think, well, I haven't achieved much in life to get what he's got. Now, of course, this can, for me, I quickly got over that, and I'll explain why, but it can also, there's a dark side to that. Now, I'm not putting down, please, I'm not putting down in any of these categories the fact that it's okay to have stuff. It's whether you actually value yourself in relation to your stuff and value others in relation to what they have or not. That's where the problem is. But the dark side of having a lot of wealth and comparing yourself to others, I can remember, again, watching, there was a long-running political and judicial sort of inquiry that was going on with a very wealthy businessman in Sydney who had been a politician but had been caught up in corruption, and he was going to trial. And I can remember him coming out of the steps of the courts in one of those trial appearances, and there was a whole lot of reporters there, and they were putting all sorts of questions to him. And he just stopped and he looked at one of the reporters, and with an expletive he said, "Who do you think you are?" He said, what do you earn? You probably earn about, what, 60, 80 grand a year? He said, "I wouldn't even get out of bed for that." What a put down. But that's how he measures people. Obviously, it's how he measured himself. But my question is, what if? What if you lose your wealth, whatever it is you have? What if it's taken away? Where do you stand then? Has your sense of yourself suddenly gone? Been lowered? Let's quickly go to another one. What about our looks? Now, the world again that we live in is very quick to tell us that not only is it the wealth that we have, but it's also how we look on the outside. You're either one of the beautiful ones or you're not. And that can determine for a lot of people how you feel about yourself. It's what images you not only project of yourself and what you wear and how you dress yourself up, but it's also what you're projecting on your social media platforms. Yeah, just working on the grass here, put a bit more green in before I forget. I figured out a long time ago that for me, looks, I was never going to be a winner in that category. I realised that over time, I looked very different, when I was younger. But time has a way of wasting us. There comes moments in life when you look at yourself in the mirror and you realise that you kind of start to sag and bag and drag a bit, and you can't reverse that. Does that mean that I'm less of a person because my looks are changing? Because I can't dress up in the latest fashions? There's got to be something deeper. There's got to be something more real, more lasting than just our looks. That leads me to the last category. But before I do, I'm just going to start putting in some trees. As I mentioned before, I'm going to create that sense of perspective by having some trees which are larger because they're in the foreground, and I'll just put some more colour on these and then some leaf foliage on the top using some different greens and browns. But as I was also thinking about our sense of how do we value ourselves, of course, the world can also dictate to us that it's all about achievements. Whether you are a winner or a loser. How many trophies do you have on the shelf? How many awards can you stack up with your name on? And again, please, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with achieving and trying to excel. I try to do that with my art. With every painting, I want to do my best. But if that's the way we measure ourselves, if that's what we're trusting in, it can really let us down, because it's kind of like when you're walking along the beach and on some particular mornings there perhaps has been a storm through the night and there's a lot of foam on the water's edge. And as you pick up that foam and you hold it up to the sun, it glitters in the sun like a jewel. It just catches all the colours of the spectrum of the light. And then, it's gone. It just disappears. And that's what fame and achievements can be like. You can have it, you can be at the top, and then it's gone. Because you can't hold on to it. There's always going to be someone else who's going to be a little bit better than you. There's going to be someone else who is trying to push you off the top. And even if you are still at the top for quite a few years, what happens when you stop being a sport hero? What happens when you stop being the best of whatever it is area that you're working in? Has your sense of identity and self suddenly gone? As I said, there is something deeper that we have to go to. And I'm now just going to put a little bit more, put some leaves up here on the tree. And as I do this, I'd like to suggest that there is another place we can go to find our real sense of value. And one of the things that I like to do is to go to a quiet place. And that's why I'm drawing this beach scene. Because for me, going for a walk down the beach is a way to unplug It's a way to just get away from the noise and the distractions of the world that I'm living in. And as I'm walking just quietly along the beach, perhaps early in the morning, that's when I can start to just go to that inner space, that deeper place within us, that heart of hearts, that centre where the real you is. And I'd like you just to perhaps try this one time. In the quietness, in that centre, to be honestly sincere and just put the question out, not to yourself, but to your sense of God. Whatever your understanding of God is, just ask that question. What do you value me as? What do you think I'm worth? And this is where I would suggest that the instant reply is, you are priceless. You are a priceless, living work of art in the making. And if that subjective question is a little bit too hard to take or to believe in, then please look at the person of Jesus, who came to flesh out God's incredibly amazing, radical love towards each one of us. And it was Jesus who, when you read through his life account, the people that he encountered, who were from all walks of life, and most of them were losers in the eyes of his society. Most of them were outcasts. Most of them were flawed. Most of them were in a really bad place and thought that their lives were nothing. But in that encounter with Jesus, in the words that he spoke, in his embrace of them, in sitting down and just having meals with them, including them in his friendship, there was a transformation. And they intuitively understood that in God's eyes, that they were unique, that they were loved deeply, that they were priceless. And it was Jesus who then, in an amazing display of self-giving, who went to the cross, and in the laying down of his life, somehow, in a cosmic mystery, I don't understand it, but he was able to take all of our faults and all of our failures and all of our mess-ups, and he was able to embrace that and just, in that love transformation, let us know that all has been put right, that we are forgiven, that we are healed, that God is wanting to stay connected with us, no matter what. It's not only just for a few select people who think their lives are together. It's not just for a few people who think that they're religious enough. It is for all of us. God wants to express, just like I'm trying to express myself in a little way through this piece of art, God for some reason wants to express God's self in and through us in a very unique way. Each one of us, just like the grains of sand on the beach. I'll come back to the fence in a moment. Are different under a microscope. There's not one the same. Each one of us is uniquely different. Your personality, your gifts, your abilities, and particularly in connection with God, the way that you express that in this world is going to be a one-off, an amazing, priceless, living work of art. And that's, for me, why I try to find these places where I can go to a quiet place, because I need to remind myself often when I'm feeling old and decrepit, when I am feeling a bit of a failure, when I am making that mistake of comparing myself to others, I need to go within, and it's there that Jesus continues through the Christ Spirit to affirm God's love to us. It's there that we are reminded moment by moment that we are created in God's image. Just like I'm creating this painting, God created each one of us in his image and likeness. And I'd like to just finish off by taking that word likeness and doing something completely wrong with it, I know, but I like this thought I had. We are made in God's likeness, It's not just that there's a bit of God shining through us as part of our inner self that we can connect with. But sometimes I think, well, God loves me, yes, but that's God's job. You know, that's on God's job description. And we hear it so many times that we can just take it for granted. God loves us. But let me put it this way. God likes you. He likes you. All of you. And He's the one who is spending time pushing that like button. He likes you. He likes you. Or just quietly letting us know that on the inside out. As I finish this painting off, feel free to just enjoy watching and also have a colourful day.